So I want to welcome all of our attendees who are with us today. My name is Tom Giovanetti. I'm the president of the Institute for Policy Innovation. IPI is a 34-year-old free market think tank based in Dallas. I want to welcome you all to our Zoom briefing today on online freedom of speech and the states. And I want to mention that our focus today is on state level action, not federal level action. Now, we will probably mention some federal things, but bear in mind that all of our guests are state representatives or state senators, and the focus of today's event is at the state level. We appreciate you all being here with us today. I want to especially thank our donors and supporters who are with us today. Thank you very much for being a supporter of IPI and making these things possible. If after today's discussion, you're impressed enough that you think you'd like to also become an IPI supporter, we would love that. You can contact Addie Crimmins here at IPI, and she will be delighted to talk to you about ways that you can get involved with IPI. And of course, we really will appreciate that. Today's event is going to be moderated by Bartlett Clellan. One of his hats is that he is a research fellow here at IPI and has been associated with us for many years. And so I'm actually in the unusual position of being a panelist today. Bartlett, thank you for carrying the load today on moderation, and I'll turn things over to you.
Thank you, Tom. Welcome, everyone. Happy to have you here for, I think this is the second or third one we've done in a series of technology issues for this year, with a couple more coming soon, to be announced soon and to be done over the next couple months. So as Tom mentioned, today we're discussing online freedom of speech in the states. And make sure you are preparing your questions. We will have time, hopefully 20 minutes or so at the end for questions. And I will do my very best to try to get to every question, or barring that, to try to batch questions together to at least give a pretty broad cut at the kind of questions we're getting. So with that, let me introduce our panel. And I personally want to thank each of you. I know each of you one-on-one and personally, some for a very long time. And I appreciate the time that you're giving to this panel on my behalf, much less IPI's. So first of all, Senator Bryan Hughes, with the Capitol background that we all recognize if you've ever visited an office there. Senator Hughes is now serving his second term in the Texas Senate, representing the 16 counties of Senate District 1 in Northeast Texas, including my in-laws. Before being elected in the Senate in 2016, he represented District 5 in the Texas House of Representatives for 14 years. Born and raised in East Texas, Bryan attended Tyler Junior College and the University of Texas at Tyler, becoming the first in his family to graduate from college after receiving his BBA in economics, cum laude. In 1992, he earned his law degree from Baylor and obtained a prestigious clerkship with U.S. District Judge William Steger. Following his service to the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of Texas, for any of you who follow patent issues, you recognize that, Bryan has practiced law and helped many East Texans work through a variety of challenging legal issues. Next up is Representative Danny Perez of Florida, who I had the delight of meeting just a few months ago. He represents District 116, where he has lived since he was 6 years old. Talk about a lifetime dedication to a district. He is a successful attorney and a dedicated member of the community, committed to serving and protecting the district residents and families in Tallahassee. He holds a bachelor's from Florida State University and a JD from the Loyola University, New Orleans College of Law. He is married to Stephanie Nicholas and is the father to Camila and Mateus. Hope I got that right, Danny.
There you go. Good job.
I feel like I still screwed it up. All right. And then Justin Hill from my home state. Justin Hill represents part of St. Louis County, District 108, for those of you in the know, in the Missouri House of Representatives. He was elected to his first two-term session in November of 2014. In addition to his legislative duties, Representative Hill is currently an employee benefits consultant. He previously served with the O'Fallon Police Department for 13 years. And during that time, I find this to be infinitely fascinating personally, Representative Hill was assigned to the St. Charles County Regional Drug Task Force as an undercover detective, and to the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration, as a task force officer. Representative Hill finished his law enforcement career as a patrol sergeant in 2014. He holds an MPA from Liberty University, and Justice and his wife Mandy have 4 children. Huge family, love it. And everyone here knows Tom. And as he already mentioned, not in his usual role as moderator today. I actually put him to work today. Instead of interviewing, he is going to be interviewed. So Tom, thank you for joining the panel as well. All right, I'm going to give a minute or two setup here, and then Representative Perez, we're going to come to you first. Few public policy issues have captured the attention, I think it's fair to say, of lawmakers and certainly of industry as much as the debate about online moderation of content, particularly on social media platforms. What should platforms allow their customers to say and when? Should platforms be forced to be open, post any material? Do private online platforms have First Amendment obligations whatsoever? And does the First Amendment actually protect them against government regulation? Florida has passed a law regulating content moderation, and several others have considered proposals. Texas is, because of the special sessions, is still in the process of considering a proposal, as a matter of fact. So what is the role of government industry when it comes to what is posted online? And where are we with individual responsibility? All right, so let's jump right in, find out what has happened in 2021 legislative sessions, or in the case of Texas, what is still going on in state legislative sessions. And Representative Perez, I'll turn to you first. Let's talk about Florida for a bit. How did this issue, rise to the level it did in Florida, that is up to the governor, and pass into law? What was your motivation being involved in the discussion? And I'm assuming there was some discussion as well around the legality and constitutionality as you went forward. How did that conversation factor into your or the state's final decision? Turn it over to you.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate you guys inviting me, and I enjoy this topic very much. It was a very contentious topic for us in Tallahassee this past session. I believe we were the first state to pass it, and President Trump does reside in Florida. But it's important to note that this bill didn't pass solely because of President Trump and the banning that has taken place of him on every social media platform that is at least at the top of popularity scales nowadays. But it was a variety of constituents, not just on the House basis, but in the Senate and directly in communications with the governor's office, that were getting deplatformed or banned or shadow banned for a variety of reasons. One, and the most popular, being what they were actually posting. So what we wanted to make sure is that no one was getting picked on because of a certain ideology of policy or a letter next to their name that defines them based on the party that they represent. And we were finding in Florida that more often than not, we believe that that was happening. Obviously, many people may disagree with that, and that's perfectly fine. That's why we live in the greatest country in the world where people can disagree. But what we were able to do is we were able to pass legislation that if you were and I'm gonna summarize this as best as we can. It's a 17-page bill in the House, but if you were to break it down in simple form, it'd be the following: if you were a political candidate and you were to get shadow banned because of a post based on your political ideology, and there are certain requirements that you didn't meet before you banned this user. Some of those requirements include a 7-day notice before the ban in order for them to fix it, and for there to be a review of that policy to determine if it was something that lives up to the scrutiny of being banned. If after those 7 days, there was obviously either not an agreement on the policy and the post and whether it should be up or down, and that person is banned based on a subjective set of posts by the social media platform company, and they still ban the user, then our elections commission would have the ability to fine that company $250,000 per day if this person were a political candidate. So we are noticing that most of the time the banning had to do with political candidates or elected officials, and so that was specifically tailored to them. There are other parts of the bill that had to do with algorithms and the ability for people to opt out from being a part of the algorithms of these social media platform companies. Many times we do not know what consents have been given to them to use or not to use our information, and oftentimes what we were seeing is sometimes these notices were changing, consent forms are changing without notice to the user. And so we had put in there a requirement for the users to have notice before any sort of algorithm or consent form or any data would be changed that was being used on behalf of that user within the state of Florida. So there are many different parts of the bills. Those are more of the highlights. But really, I think the important message to get across is that we wanted to make sure, regardless of party, whether you were Republican, Democrat, left or right, liberal, conservative, or smack in the middle, although there seems to be less of those nowadays, regardless of where you were, that you had the ability to speak your mind without getting banned because of a panel that had subjective ideas on what should or should not be a valid post on behalf of a social media company. We were challenged. We did believe it was constitutional. We still do in the state. However, we were challenged, and a federal court recently did rule against the state, but we are in the process of appealing that. And so obviously, for those of you who know how litigation takes place, we're not really talking much about what's going on in the litigation side of things, but it is an ongoing discussion. And we definitely believe that the state of Florida is on the right side of history, on the right side of the future, and definitely on the right side of this policy that's before us. So we passed it with a good majority in the House and the Senate, and the governor did sign it. And it was a priority of all three chambers, for lack of a better term. But it is a moving target as we speak. But that's a brief little synopsis. I hope I didn't pass my time. I was looking at the clock as I was speaking.
No, that was great. And thank you for being so succinct. I'll let everyone know Representative Perez has another obligation. He may or may not be with us for a different set of questions, but thank you for getting that out. Putting aside the content of the case, do we have a timeline for when things will be heard the next round?
We don't as of now.
Okay.
This obviously we could appeal it again after this if we were still on the wrong side of the court's decision, and whether that decision or whether that will take place or not is something that I'm sure the governor's office is still reviewing. And I don't obviously want to speak on behalf of the governor's office, but I don't know exactly what steps would be taken after this, depending on the decision. And obviously, we hope and we believe that we'll be on the right side of the next court's decision.
Great. Thank you very much. Really appreciate that. In fact, that was probably the best encapsulation I've ever read or heard, frankly, about the Florida bill. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, Senator Hughes, my old friend, how are you doing, sir?
Hey, man.
I've been all right. Thank you for joining us. So as I understand it, the Texas proposal, which I'm just going to call your legislation, so you can be modest, but it's yours, takes a slightly different approach than in Florida. Would you explain that? And then the same question I had for Representative Perez. What are your thoughts on the constitutionality? And I know you'll get to this, but the constitutionality and the legality of the Texas approach.
You bet. Thanks, Counselor, for having me to talk about this. It's obviously a hot issue. And in 2019, the Texas Senate passed a bill that I authored to address the issue. It did not get through the House, and so it did not become law. That was back in 2019. And we're thankful for Florida. Representative Perez is correct. A number of states have filed bills, but Florida is the first one to get it to the governor's desk and signed. And so we're excited about that. And as you know, that court ruling, I won't talk about their lawsuit either, but that court ruling in the Florida case enjoined only part of that Florida statute, not the whole thing. And so again, we'll see what the appellate court does, but we're thankful for Florida and the leadership they show in so many areas. In Texas, like everybody else, we hear from folks back home who are frustrated. They don't know what the rules are. They get punished. They can't figure out why. There's no one to talk to. There's no appeal process that they can figure out. And so terribly frustrating. I think everybody acknowledges, I think we have to acknowledge these social media companies are the new town square. That's where people go to hash it out, to share ideas, to express their views. And of course, for all purposes, they are common carriers. Now, sometimes we think of a common carrier like a pipeline regulated in a certain way. That's part of it. But the common carrier concept, as you know, goes back to the English common law. And by every measure that we can come up with, these social media companies, the big ones fit that measure based on their market share, based on what they do, based on how they operate. And as you know, we had an event not long ago, and someone suggested it was a radical leftist concept that we could regulate these companies as common carriers. As you know, that radical leftist Clarence Thomas has suggested and made a good case for how we could regulate these companies as common carriers, because it just makes sense. Just like your phone company can't deny you service because of your religion, Your cable TV doesn't cut you off because of your politics. Why is that? Because they're common carriers. And these social media platforms, the big ones, are even more so. So we're on strong legal ground. Now, we do have to deal with Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, right? That federal statute that gives these companies great protection. It allows them to discriminate, allows them to do things that the government can't do. It gives them way too much power, but that's the law. Even under Section 230, states are allowed to regulate these companies. That's what we're doing. So content moderation versus viewpoint discrimination, right? Content moderation, stuff's lewd, lascivious, violent, harassing, of course. That's got to be dealt with. Those companies not only are allowed to, they must do that. And so Senate Bill 5, which we passed in the last special session, and we also passed during the regular session through the Senate, it says, yes, content moderation, yes, do that. In fact, if someone tells a company about illegal activity, illegal content, they've got to address that in a certain amount of time. The bill also says, social media companies, tell us what the rules are. Just tell us so we'll know, because right now people are flying blind. Oh, you violated our community standards. You didn't tell me which one or how or what I can do differently. So tell us what the rules are, give us an appeal process. And then the bill says, if you, a Texan, are deplatformed, taken off, pushed down, if you're censored, not based on content, not lewd, lascivious, violent, harassing, but based on your viewpoint, be that left, right, just as Representative Perez says, if you're discriminated against based on your viewpoint, there's a way for you to get back online. You take that company to court, any Texas court, and ask not for money damages. This is not a lawsuit lottery, not for money damages, but ask for a judgment from that court that you've been wronged. And in order to get back online, the company has to put you back online and they've got to pay your attorney's fees. So you're made whole. What if you can't find a lawyer? Well, the Attorney General's office in Texas is empowered to represent you as well. The idea is getting Texans back online, keeping the discussion going. Again, both sides of the coin are important. These companies, by virtue of their market share and by virtue of the business they're in, have tremendous power. Scholars on the left and right, and every person realizes how important they've become. This is where we go to hash it out. This is the new town square, and they have to be treated that way. Sometimes we want to hide behind this notion that, well, they're private companies, we can't touch them. Well, that's silly. Again, what about the cable company? What about the phone company? Of course we can. Free speech is important in America. And as Rep. Perez said, it's not just conservative speech. You probably saw where Senator Elizabeth Warren had a post about the power of Facebook and how about the antitrust concerns about their power. And of course, Facebook took down her post. And so it's not just on the right, it happens on the left. It's about free speech. It's about open channels of communication so that we can get to the best result in America. So Senate Bill 5 passed the Texas Senate. Right now over in the House, we are in special session, as you say. My friend Representative Briscoe Cain has filed House Bill 20, which has all the elements of Senate Bill 5. It's moving through the House, should be on the floor this week. So we hope to have that to the governor's desk soon. Governor Abbott has personally been involved in writing this bill. We've talked on the phone, we've talked in person. He came to my district to do an event just in support of this bill. It's important to him, it's important to Texans, and we're going to get this fixed.
So I have to ask, are you having to still get your day passes to leave the floor? Is that still, do you have yours there? What color are we today?
So over in the House, yeah, they have to get official permission to leave because they haven't had a quorum. So we barely have a quorum. We have 100 members yesterday, 99 the day before. So far, so good. So far, so good.
All right. Well, the nation is watching, as you well know, All righty. So believe it or not, we have 50 states and we have at least 3 different approaches to what to do on content moderation here on this call. I suspect we could probably end up with about 50 different approaches, but I grab guys that I know, like, and trust. And so next we have Representative Hill. And Representative Hill in Missouri, Missourians took yet a different approach than Florida or Texas. What did Missouri decide and why?
Well, first, I have to say how good it is to be with my good friend, Senator Bryan Hughes and Representative Perez. You know, he knows we differ on this issue, but we are best friends.
One issue we differ on, I think. This is it.
What did Missouri do in regards to, honestly, this is the Bill of Rights we're talking about. This is the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. And deep red Missouri recognizes that the Bill of Rights regulates government and not private companies. So we actually met with each other in caucus because a bill was filed, and we decided that, Missouri is not in the place to tell companies what they can or can't do. We prefer the free market to handle these issues. And we hear a lot about, we want to know the rules of these private companies. So, there's this thing called terms of service. Each one of us clicks on that we agree to the terms of service to use someone's property, their platform. But how many of us truly read them? They get long, I'll be honest. And maybe a good, something good to do in the future would be to put some more notification or shorten terms of service or get to the point, or maybe a special section on content moderation. But we're talking about literally somebody voluntarily coming to a private company and saying, I would like to use your platform, and then using the force of government to tell them what they can or cannot do with their property. And Missouri is just not in support of that. So we joined states like, not states, but the governor of Utah. Actually, Utah was the first state to pass a content moderation bill, and it was vetoed. Vetoed largely because the governor of Utah recognized that it was a violation of the Constitution. Corporations do have freedom of speech, and it's just when I go talk to constituents that I serve, they're angry. They are angry. Everything they see on platforms, they feel like they're getting treated differently. They're getting moderated more than anyone else on the left. They don't like it. But whenever I ask them if they would like to retain the ability to kick me out of their kitchen because I don't like something that they say, or they don't like something that I say, they want to maintain that right. And they want to be able to kick me out of their kitchen for things that they want to moderate. So, Missouri is the show me state. So we are waiting to see how Florida turns out, how Texas turns out, but largely we're going to stick by the Constitution.
Thank you very much for that. And Tom, I know you're very good at patiently waiting. You testify a lot, so you're used to hearing lots of legislators go before you. So I can't help but imagine you have lots of thoughts here. And I'm particularly thinking of you testifying in Austin a couple months ago now. But as you give your thoughts, would you also make sure to hit on the natural tension between state and federal action? I think there's a lot to be said there, and everyone has touched on it. So I just want to highlight that. And then after your comments, we'll go to another question, and then just remind people in the audience, get your questions ready, because after we do that next question to our panelists, then we'll come back to you. So anyway, Tom, floor is yours.
Thank you, Bartley. Yes, you're right. I mean, for those of us who testify before legislature, sometimes you sit around 8 hours in order to speak for 2 minutes. so by the time your opportunity shows up, you're either exhausted or completely, charged up and raring to go. The first thing I want to say to my friend, Senator Bryan Hughes, is Senator Hughes, my COVID beard takes a knee in respect to your COVID beard. That is one fine bit of facial hair you have there. I couldn't help but notice that all four of us panelists have beards, so there must be some big social change going on as far as men's styles or whatever. So my role and my job is to be a policy person. It's not my job to please any voters or any voting constituency. It's not my job to be responsive to the voters. It's not my job to be loyal to any agenda or any politician or any party. It's my job to zoom in and focus on the policy itself and the law itself. So with that said, despite my respect for Senator Hughes and for the many good conservatives in Florida who are showing us so much leadership in so many areas, I think all of the approaches that we have heard described trying to regulate social media platforms are a bad idea. And I think they're doomed to fail because they run smack into important constitutional protections. And frankly, if they succeeded, which they won't, but if they succeeded, we would actually end up in a worse place than we're in now. And I want to try to explain all of that. For those of us who are big proponents of free markets, we never argue that markets are perfect. We never argue that the private sector delivers perfect results. For those of us who believe in free markets, the markets don't always deliver the results that even we prefer. But free markets are not perfect, but they're better than the alternative. And the alternative is government-directed economy, government in direction of the way certain industries work, the way the economy works. So I think a lot of times, in fact, we did an IPI Policy Basics podcast on this very concept, that markets are not perfect, they're just better than the alternative. Markets don't always give us the results that we prefer. And for many of us on the center right, we're not getting the result that we prefer right now from social media platforms, that's for sure. The question is, would government intervention make things better or worse? And I think it's clear that government intervention would actually make things worse, not better. To me, there are a couple of really fundamental key issues here, and I want to focus on those. The first is the First Amendment prohibition against government-compelled speech. Now, when people think of the First Amendment, they think almost exclusively in terms of the fact that government is not allowed to censor us, the government is not allowed to prevent us from speaking. But equally important to the government not being able to stop us from speaking, the government also cannot compel us to speak. The government cannot force us to engage in political speech or political activity. And it cannot compel us to host or to facilitate political speech that we disagree with. The government cannot tell the New York Times what op-eds it has to run. The government cannot force the Austin American-Statesman to run a particular op-ed or a particular editorial. The government can't tell TV and radio outlets what content they must carry, because there is clear and broad Supreme Court jurisprudence against compelled speech. This is really crucial. And let me just really be very, very pointed to conservatives about why this is very crucial. Right now, the state of Colorado is trying to compel a Christian baker named Jack Phillips to host political speech on his platform that he doesn't agree with, okay? Now for Jack Phillips, his platform is his cake. Now if a gay couple come into Jack Phillips' store and want to buy some brownies, he has to sell them to them because of civil rights protections and equal access laws. But he does not have to host political speech that he disagrees with on his cake. He does not have to put a political message on that cake that he disagrees with. The reason he doesn't have to do it is because of the First Amendment prohibition against compelled speech. A lot of people think Jack Phillips's best defense is religious freedom, but it's not. And it's not because of a Supreme Court decision called the Smith case, the Smith decision. Jack Phillips will eventually prevail before the Supreme Court, but he will prevail based on the First Amendment prohibition against compelled speech, that the government cannot compel him to host speech on his platform that he disagrees with. Now, folks, for Facebook and Twitter, their cake is their website. Their platform is their website. It is exactly the same issue. The government cannot compel Jack Phillips to host speech that he doesn't agree with, and the government cannot compel social media platforms to host speech that they disagree with. It's a fundamental principle, and it's why the Florida case was so quickly enjoined by the very first judge who saw it, because you don't even need to get to the details of the Florida bill, because at a very high level, first order level, the Florida bill is in violation of the First Amendment prohibition against compelled speech. Now, we as conservatives need to understand that we don't want to live in a world where government can compel private actors to host speech that they disagree with. We don't want to live in that world. Freedom is messy. Freedom is problematic, but as Thomas Jefferson said, he would rather live in a system with the inconveniences of too much liberty than with the inconveniences of too little liberty. And I think that quote applies very clearly in this case. So the biggest problem with these approaches is that they violate the First Amendment prohibition against compelled speech. But there's another problem as well. And by the way, just to close up that issue, I often do not like the content moderation choices that are made by Facebook or Twitter, just like the LGBT community does not like the content moderation decisions being made by Jack Phillips. Okay, but it is exactly the same issue. They are parallel issues. And if you want to maintain Jack Phillips's freedom against compelled speech, you got to maintain the freedom of social media platforms against compelled speech as well. Now, there's a couple of other points that I want to make, and then I'll stop and we'll get to more of the discussion part of the program. There's a lot of terms being thrown around by proponents of social media regulation, and the terms are being used in a sloppy and careless way. I testified yesterday, Bartlett, in Texas, before the House Select Committee on Senator Hughes. This is Briscoe Cain's bill, which is sort of the House version of yours. And Briscoe kept describing social media platforms as akin to common carriers. And when he was asked if they were common carriers, he said, no, they're not common carriers, they're akin to common carriers. And he must have used the word akin 30 times yesterday. Now, the reason he's doing this is that the proponents have realized, in fact, that social media platforms do not fit the definition of common carriers. And so they're saying they are akin to common carriers. Well, the problem is you either are or you aren't. There is no legal framework for something that is akin to a common carrier or like a common carrier. So you're either a common carrier or you're not, and the social media platforms do not fit the classic tests of common carriers. They don't sell anything. They don't sell goods and services. They make their services available for free. They're also interstate. They're not intrastate, which raises a serious question about whether a particular state can classify them as common carriers. If social media platforms can be classified as common carriers, it almost certainly has to be the federal government that does it because of the fact that they are inherently interstate rather than intrastate. But also in this area of throwing around terms in a way that's kind of careless and sloppy, people are calling them the new public square. They're calling them, the new community square or whatever. The problem is they're not the public square because they're not public. When we talk about the public square, we're talking about, in the old days, you go down to the community park in the middle of town and you set up a shoebox or something and you stand up and you start giving your hot political speech, right? And you're allowed to do that because you literally are in the public square. You're on government-owned land, right? There's a reason why if people want to protest at abortion clinics, they can do it as long as they're in the right-of-way, but they can't do it when they're on the actual property of the abortion clinic. Because it turns out that the public-private distinction actually matters a great deal. So while these social media platforms have become very large in some cases and very broad, they are not public and they are not the public square, and no one has to participate in them. I know a number of people who simply have opted out of all social media. I know people who are on Instagram, but not Facebook or Twitter. I know people who are only on Twitter and not Facebook. These things are not necessities of life. They're not requirements. They're not necessary to political engagement. You don't have to have access to a social media platform in order to engage as a citizen in the political process in the United States. So I would urge proponents to be very precise in the way they use terms. Akin to common carrier is meaningless. Calling them common carriers is simply legally imprecise. Calling them the new public square is a generalization, but it is not actually a real term. And I want to point out finally that every state has an attorney general and every state has consumer protection laws. There's already a broad body of laws that if any consumer feels like they have been mistreated by a private company or abused by a private company, if they feel that their freedom of speech rights have been abrogated, we already have plenty of consumer protection laws. Every state has its own state constitution, and that consumer may have rights granted to him or her by the state constitution that they don't have granted to by the federal constitution. So we already have consumer protection laws. We already have attorneys general. If someone is being harmed by a private company, whether they're a social media platform or whether they're a paper towel manufacturer, we already have consumer protection laws and we already have attorneys general. So it's not like consumers are naked and afraid when it comes to their interaction with social media platforms. And so I'll stop there. I'm sure I've already gone over my time. I'll stop there, and Bartlett, you can move on to the next phase. Thanks.
All right. Well, okay. Thanks, Tom. And you said this at the beginning of your comments, and it is important to note you're not dealing with constituents, and so I want to pivot there and turn to our elected officials because they do have to deal with constituents. And one thing I've heard a lot of in the last month is kind of regardless of where legislators are on this issue, they hear a lot from their constituents about it. And some frankly feel compelled to do something. Even Justin, for example, even used that exact example in what he was saying. So, and I've heard at the federal level as well. In fact, that was exactly the question put to me. But yes, but what do I do when my boss is receiving all of these phone calls? So the constituents aren't happy, even if the proposed controls they want on online content in some cases are diametrically opposed with others. Generally, Republicans is general. Generally, Republicans are wanting less control by social media, so kind of open platforms where anything can be posted without any kind of limitations or with some kind of fairly well-known limitations, let's say, that exist in other places in the law. Whereas Democrats typically argue there should be mandates for what should be removed. So just exactly the other side of what's going on. And so requiring that certain topics, I don't know what that looks like, maybe a list of 50 things you can't say or something, that you'd have to take that information down if it were ever put up or not allowed to be posted in the first place. So at the very least, this has become a political issue, but is it more than that? And also to our legislators, what do you think industry should be doing? I hear what you're saying about legislation, but is there anything industry should be doing that is now or before or even after there's legislation? So Senator Hughes, let me come to you first, and then Justin, I'll come to you next. And then Tom, I've got a final question for you.
Well, thank you so much. And so they're doing a little window dressing now because there have been so many complaints and so many legislative moves to give citizens some input that finally Facebook has this committee now. They put somebody on there from Cato, so now all the world is fine. I don't know how many folks are on that committee, but given the millions of pieces of content removed daily, it's just silly to suggest that a committee of 10 people is going to be able to give the people of Texas or the people of America any kind of a recourse. Now, as far as what the government role should be, I appreciate that Representative Kane said these companies are akin to common carriers. Let me be clear. When House Bill 20 passes or Senate Bill 5 passes, as a matter of law, they will be common carriers. That's the finding of the bill. And again, I would commend to everybody Biden versus Knight, First Amendment Institute at Columbia University, Supreme Court case this year. Read Justice Thomas's concurring opinion. I don't think you'll find he was sloppy with his terms. These companies are common carriers. The big ones are. And just one point here I'll make as far as alternatives. Here's how Justice Thomas put it so well. It changes nothing that these platforms are not the sole means for distributing speech or information. A person always could choose to avoid the toll bridge or train and instead swim the Charles River or hike the Oregon Trail. But in assessing whether a company exercises substantial market power, what matters is whether the alternatives are comparable. For many of today's digital platforms, nothing is. Again, I just commend that opinion to you. And I'm a big fan of Tom Giovanetti's and also Justin Hill's, and of course yours, Bart, and we can differ on these things. But guys, I'm telling you, this is, look at the size and scope and breadth and reach and power of these companies, this handful of companies, this oligarchy that have made themselves the guardians, the gatekeepers of free speech. Of course, we're not advocating some government agency says this is in, this is out. That's why we like the approach of putting these matters in front of the courts. American courts have a couple of 100 years experience in deciphering and determining and drawing lines about free speech and about what's appropriate, how to balance all those interests. There's a way to do this. But yes, what can the companies do? For the first time, Twitter now says, I was at an event with you guys, and Twitter says they have an appeal process. I haven't seen it work. That's part of the frustration we hear from people, and they get blocked, and I don't know what to do. Who do I call? I don't know what to do. Folks on this call can probably get a hold of a Facebook lobbyist, but most of our constituents can't. And it's been my experience that even the Facebook lobbyists don't have very satisfying answers for what happened. They'll hide behind some algorithm, or maybe they'll say, yeah, we shouldn't have blocked your post about your Easter sunrise service. Sorry about that. But now Easter has passed, or the event's passed, or the issue has passed. And that's the problem. And that's the problem with what they're doing. So yes, the things that companies can do, they can do what my bill tells them to do. And tell us what the rules are. Don't just say terms of service. Tell us what the rules are. What are the key words you're looking for so folks can choose to avoid them if they want to? Right now, it is simply not happening. And to suggest that if someone's aggrieved, they can call the AG, that's just silly. That is just not reality. As far as the constitutional protections, the Texas Constitution does give more protection than the US. Tom, you know this. Our Texas Constitution has an affirmative grant of free speech, not just a protection from the government harming it, but an affirmative grant of free speech. That's part of the basis. And as far as the town square, look at the Prune Yard case. Malls have long been considered, though they're private property, in many states they're recognized as the town square, where people go to hash it out. That's what these companies are. And the fact that they are this big and the big boys still don't have real competition tells us something about the barriers to entry. There's an appropriate response here, just like we do with the phone company and with the cable company. So yes, to answer your question, Bart, there are things that companies can do, and they are starting to do a little window dressing, and we're glad to see that. But we still don't see a real appeal process. We still don't see them telling us what the rules are. Tell me what the rules are, and then I can decide whether I want to try and cross the line. Because right now, nobody knows what the rules are.
Thank you, Bryan. Representative Hill, your thoughts. What can companies do? What should they be doing? What can they do, in your opinion?
Well, let me just add that, there are plenty of judges, justices, and Supreme Court decisions that I disagree with. So I can name a handful of them, but going common carrier route's just not the answer. If we truly want a public square, the government is free to create them. They've been creating them ever since the foundation of this country. It was called a public square in the middle. It was a square in the middle of a town where they provided that platform for people to go out and wave their sign and yell whatever they wanted, just to usurp a private company's platform and say it's a public square just because their market share is nonsense. I think if that's the case, then where is that public square that was called AOL? Because I remember when they were huge. In fact, they were such a behemoth, we had to break them up, right? They're gone. MySpace is gone. Going back to your question, what should they do? Well, it's up to them what they should do, because if they don't do anything, they will fail, because perception is reality in the business world, in the free market. If a majority of people think they are being treated differently on a platform because of their political opinions, they are going to lose that market share. And I'm okay with that. If conservatives want to go somewhere else, I'm totally okay with that. As a conservative, I like to use Facebook. I abide by their terms of service because I can reach so many more constituents on that platform. Yeah, if I want to talk to my hard right conservatives that follow me back home, I can go to Parler, I can go to Gab. There's so many platforms. Yeah, they don't have the same market share, but I know who I'm talking to on those platforms, and I know who I can potentially reach on the larger platforms. So if I were, yeah, I agree with the senator. I would love to see a government affair arms of these larger tech companies come up with a way to communicate better to public officials, because we are the ones. He is correct. It's hard for them to go to Facebook and feel like, or Twitter, I can't pick on one, to feel like that they're getting a fair shake in their content moderation. So it would behoove them as business owners to do something to make those customers feel good. But
Representative Hill, you
they
froze
largely
up.
are paid by advertising. No.
And you froze again. All right, Tom, let's go to you for a quick one before we run out of our time, and then we're going to questions. So Tom, for a quick shot, kind of the same question. You're obviously in the think tank space, different than the legislators. What are your thoughts on what legislators and industry should be doing?
Sure, absolutely. Look, there's a couple of things I think I really need to point out. First of all, Senator Hughes feels so strongly about this common carrier business, I think it's important to point out that even common carriers don't lose their protection against compelled speech. So even if we call them common carriers, you still cannot force them to host speech that they disagree with. So common carrier status is not the silver bullet that people think it is. In fact, if you were to succeed in labeling social media platforms as common carriers, what you'd be doing is empowering the government to start regulating their pricing, their business model, their advertising strategy. You would be giving the government an enormous amount of regulatory control, because that's what common carrier status does. But you still would not be solving the problem you're trying to solve, because you still could not force them to carry speech that they don't agree with. So it doesn't get around the First Amendment compelled speech issue. The second thing I want to point out, I mentioned during my earlier portion that Jack Phillips's strongest defense is not religious liberty. The reason for that is an infamous Supreme Court case called the Smith decision, which really defanged the religious liberty defense. The religious liberty defense is no longer as strong as it used to be. Do you know who wrote the Smith decision? Antonin Scalia. So Senator Hughes, no Supreme Court justice is right all the time. So just because Clarence Thomas made a comment in a minority comment doesn't mean somehow that he's right about it. Even Scalia was wrong on important things, and nobody's perfect. And I'm as big a fan of Clarence Thomas as there is, but his side comment in a minority opinion doesn't make law, and it doesn't set precedent. The other thing I want to comment on is, I know I've been pretty strong in my criticism of these bills. There may very well be elements of these bills that are worthwhile, because for those of us who believe in free markets, consumers need information to make good decisions. If consumers don't have good information, they can't make good decisions. And so if you believe in markets, you believe in good information, and it is a legitimate role of government to make sure that consumers have accurate information. So there may very well be some elements of like requiring social media platforms to disclose some of their practices. Those may be good ideas. And I think we should not just, I am not going to be one who just dismisses with a wave of his hand all of these efforts. I think it's just important for us to understand some of the major flaws that are in some of these efforts. But again, markets are facilitated by good information, by accurate information. It's a legitimate role of the Securities and Exchange Commission, for instance, to make sure that investments and mutual funds have to disclose tons of information. So I think there may be some good ideas in some of these bills. It's just that sort of the core approach is highly problematic. And I also want to say that for those of us, yeah, I know Bartlett rolls his eyes because I'm not being quick. For those of us who are defenders of markets, as I said earlier, we don't say markets are perfect. They're just better than the alternative. But the other thing is, we're not required to defend markets at any given slice in time, because markets change over time and they improve. And I think the social media companies are actually learning in real time some of the things that they're doing that are alienating some of their customers. Facebook and Twitter do not want to alienate half of the country. They really don't want to, because they're greedy capitalists and they want as many eyeballs as possible. They want as many people on their platform as possible. And I do believe over time that markets work, and that fundamentally businesses want to please their customers, not alienate their customers. And so I am a firm believer that 4 years from now, the social media platforms will be doing a better, more accurate, more targeted job of content moderation than they are today. I think that will happen because I have a faith that markets work over time. Maybe not in any given slice in time, but they work over time. And I have a file folder full of news clips of people demanding that MySpace be broken up on antitrust grounds because they're too big and too powerful. That's another example of the fact that markets work over time.
All right. All right, I'm back. Okay, good deal. So we've got tons of questions. We actually have 9 questions in the queue. There's some really good ones in here. Let's try to get through as many as possible. So I'm begging the indulgence of the panel to quick, pithy. which is unfair in some of these cases. I get that because these are big topics. So Senator Hughes, I'm going to go to you with this one to start, but everybody feel free to jump in. So Trace Mitchell asks or states and then asks, common carriers are natural monopolies that do not discriminate in what they carry. How do social media companies fit that description? They are not natural monopolies and have always limited what they carry. And then I'm going to throw this second piece in here, Bryan, for you guys too. And isn't it the First Amendment, not Section 230, that gives these companies the ability to moderate content? So how are they common carrier, which I know we've talked about a little bit. And then is it Section 230 or the First Amendment? To you, Bryan.
You bet. So natural monopoly is not a common law requirement to being found a common carrier. Some of those elements are there. And again, the sheer fact of their market share, it's also interesting that because they have so many users and such market share, that's part of what makes them so valuable and part of what makes them so much more powerful. So yeah, there's a number of factors to consider in an analysis about common carrier. Tom invoked all the regulation, and there's all kinds of stuff about pipelines and phone companies. The general concept is, though, that a common carrier, because of its size, because of the services it offers, and because the way it holds itself out, is treated differently than a run-of-the-mill private company. That's the threshold question. And if you analyze that based on common law grounds, you get there pretty quickly with the larger social media companies, not with everyone, but with the larger ones. We mentioned Section 230 because Section 230 says what? It allows those common carriers to have it both. It allows those, the common carriers. It allows the social media companies to have it both ways, right? It says that they can make editorial decisions, but then they're not held accountable as a publisher. That's one of the reasons Section 230 is important, because it gives them protection that the Austin American Statesman, the New York Times, does not have. Section 230 gives them special protection that other companies do not have. That's why we mentioned Section 230 in particular.
Tom or Representative Hill, do you want to chime in?
Well, Senator Hughes is exactly right that common carrier has nothing to do with natural monopoly. I mean, if you're an oil or gas pipeline company, you're a common carrier and you don't have a natural monopoly. So he's right about that. He's wrong about the size issue. You could be a small company and be a common carrier. You could be a large company and not be a common carrier. And this is where some of this confusion comes in. If your issue with these platforms is that they're too big and too powerful, then the decision tree takes you in an antitrust direction, not a speech regulation direction. So if you think the platforms are too big, you have just taken an off-ramp into antitrust, not into compelled speech, not into common carrier. Common carrier has nothing to do with size. You could be a two-man business and be a common carrier.
Market share, not size, market share. But go ahead.
Sure. And then the other thing, well, you know what? I have forgotten what the other thing is. So I'll stop there and maybe it'll occur to me.
All righty. So I'm going to ask Elizabeth Alvarez, you put in a question. Could you help me define the first part? Because I think you have a great question. Her question starts, but I'm going to ask if she'll update this. Is the common carrier definition more applicable to the web service companies, the pipelines of the internet? Now, when I hear that, I think of ISPs, internet service providers. And so I just want to get a little clarification, Elizabeth, whether you're asking about people like Comcast and Charter and AT&T, et cetera, or if you're actually asking about the web service companies. Because if it's Facebook, Twitter, et cetera, I think we've answered that. But if it's something slightly different, I want to make sure we get to it because I find this part fascinating. In the meantime, let me go to anonymous attendee that wants to talk about viewpoint-based laws, which I think is also a very interesting one for the First Amendment. So aren't viewpoint-based laws even more suspect than content-based laws under the First Amendment? Wouldn't that make the Texas law even more unconstitutional than Florida's, where the judge said the law couldn't survive even lower levels of scrutiny? So I know we have Tom and Bryan who are about to claw themselves through the screen to answer this. So I will defer to my good friend Bryan Hughes to start, and then Tom will come right to you. And then Justin, if you have anything to hop in on, we'll let you in on this fun too.
So that Florida opinion from a trial court, a Democratic appointed federal judge, was concerned that the Florida legislature seemed to be focusing on discrimination against conservatives. I don't think that was in the words of the bill, but the judge seemed to latch onto that based on comments made during the process of passing the bill. The judge was concerned that this was, they were only protecting conservative speech. So I don't think that's what Florida was doing, but that's what the judge said they were doing. Let me be clear. Senate Bill 5 and House Bill 20 and the related bills in Texas are not protecting a certain viewpoint. They are preventing viewpoint discrimination. So whether it's Elizabeth Warren or, heaven forbid, Donald Trump or Joe Biden or Tom Giovanetti, it's about speech. It's about not discriminating based on one's viewpoint. So yes, that Florida opinion accused the Florida legislature of viewpoint discrimination. That is not the case. I don't think that was accurate, but it's sure not the case with the Texas bill.
Go ahead, Tom.
So let's talk about viewpoint discrimination for a minute, because again, yesterday when I was testifying in Texas, Representative Kane kept making this like this was an important distinction. He said, we're not talking about content, we're talking about viewpoint discrimination. Well, let me ask a simple question. What if I wanted to start a social media network only for conservatives? Shouldn't I be allowed to do that? Well, I wouldn't be allowed to do that under HB 20 because I would be engaging in viewpoint discrimination.
If you had 50 million monthly US users.
Right, but the number is just an arbitrary thing. Small companies become large companies and large companies become small companies. So I should be allowed to set up a social community, social network for only conservatives or only Republicans or only people who are really interested in marine reef aquariums or whatever. And by doing that, I would absolutely be engaging in viewpoint discrimination because I would be kicking people. If I started a conservative only social media network, I'd be kicking people out who weren't conservatives. I would be deleting content that wasn't conservative. I would be prohibited from doing that, or I would be prohibited from growing to a large size by HB 20. And so I think, again, this idea of prohibiting viewpoint discrimination is not the silver bullet that people think it is. In fact, it's a problem. And this is another illustration of my point that if these efforts succeed, we will end up in a worse place than we're in right now, not a better place.
Of course, users make those decisions.
I can't add much more than what stood out to me is even just putting a number on the number of, or an arbitrary number on subscribers really just pushes the argument over to antitrust anyway. I mean, so that's all I had to add.
Great. Well, so I'm going to pick up on this exact, this is from another anonymous attendee, but it's right in the same point here that you guys were getting to. In fact, Tom and Bryan, you both mentioned this right at the end of your chats. It says, why don't conservatives move to places like Parler and Gator? Is it because of a lack of content moderation that makes these platforms largely unusable and filled with lawful but awful content?
So I was talking a couple of years ago to somebody at Google, and they said, if you actually saw the real raw data on Google searches, you would come away with a much lower view of humanity than you have right now. And, you know, as a Christian, I believe that humans are flawed and there's a lot wrong with us as a species, right? So you have to engage in content moderation. If you don't, your platform will become flooded with the worst imaginable stuff, pornography and anti-Semitism and Nazi and all this sort of stuff. And Parler found this out because when Parler started off, they said, oh, you know, we're going to be a free speech platform. Anything's going to go. And they found out after a couple of weeks, you can't do it. You got to moderate. And in fact, this was the origin of Section 230. This is why Section 230 was contained within something called the Communications Decency Act. The whole purpose was to empower platforms, was to give them permission to moderate content. So the problem is, you know, I've pointed out that I think there's zero chance that these efforts survive constitutional scrutiny or legal scrutiny. But if they did, then your social media platforms would have one of two choices. Number one, we're not going to moderate anything. We're going to be a free speech, anything goes platform, in which case they would immediately be flooded by awful but lawful content, and they would drive away 90% of their consumers. Or they would have to start moderating much more heavily and just blanket banning discussion of anything controversial, politics or medicine or anything else. They would have to take steps to avoid liability. And either of those two scenarios is worse than what we have now. So this is my point. I hate to keep going back to it. Markets aren't perfect. They don't always give us the result that we want, but they're better than the alternative.
So the language of the bill itself, I'm reminded of debating the election bill with my Democratic colleagues who talk about everything but what's in the bill. Here's what's in the bill. Specifically on content moderation, companies are allowed to do whatever they're allowed to under federal law. Let's talk about Section 230. It's got that parade of the horribles. It's got lewd, lascivious, harassing, excessively violent. That's content moderation. Everybody knows what that means. Clearly, they should do that. They must do that. Nothing in any Texas legislation prevents them from doing that. In fact, they're encouraged and given a hammer to do that. So content moderation, lewd, lascivious, excessively violent, harassing, that is specifically in the law provided for. Viewpoint moderation, viewpoint discrimination is a separate matter entirely, and that's the distinction we're talking about. I've lost count of the number of straw man arguments today, but that's what we're talking about. The language of the bill is pretty clear.
Representative Hill, anything?
I wish I would have read the bill before I got on the Zoom call with Senator Hughes, but no, great discussion.
The language of the Missouri bill is much easier.
Yeah, it was. And so the discussion was a lot shorter. I mean, we were pretty easy about it.
All right, I'm going to go back to Elizabeth's question because I got some clarification, and I think it's a really good one. This comes up a lot. This is about cloud-based services, or AWS, she says specifically. But so I'm going to reread it with that in mind, and let's make that the last question. I'll have each of you give a wrap-up, however you want to do that. So what Elizabeth asked is the common carrier definition more applicable to the web service companies, so like AWS? Question mark. So does this make sense so that free market alternatives have a chance to compete better with Facebook, Twitter, etc.? So it's about where should we be looking for a common carrier to apply? Should it be better applied to a web services like AWS company? Go ahead, Bryan.
Oh, sure. I think we look at the common law elements of the common carrier doctrine, what it's about, what it means, what it applies to. There are multiple areas that it applies today, multiple areas that it doesn't apply to. And so you bet what she's saying makes sense. If you look at the context of social media and what they do and how they operate, these larger companies, because of their market share, do qualify as common carriers. But yes, it doesn't mean that the other providers don't as well as you're describing. I agree.
Tom, do you have anything to add there?
Well, I've made clear my views on whether or not social media platforms are common carriers or not. The typical common carrier is like a railroad or a gas pipeline, right? And they're in the business of selling access to their services and carrying products and services. And my point is that social media companies really in no way actually resemble the classic common carrier. And the purpose of common carrier regulation is pricing regulation, market access, things like that, not speech. And so again, I think this whole common carrier issue is an example of if conservatives succeed in getting these sites labeled as common carriers, they will actually find that it doesn't solve their core issue, but it creates a whole bunch of other issues that are actually in conflict with conservative and free market principles.
And I would agree with Tom. I'm between houses right now, building a house, and I don't want my storage shed to be considered a common carrier. I mean, just because I store stuff there doesn't mean it applies. So, the more they build, the lower the price. It's a free market. It's a very thriving market, both AWS services, similar services, and storage sheds.
Actually, here's a real quick one that's just operational. And I'm going to come to you, Senator Hughes, just because you're the one most likely to know the answer to this. Will SB 5 ultimately have the email provisions in the House bill?
Great question. So this came up during the last special session. There's an argument that email providers on the receiving end are treating Republican or conservative emails messages different from Democratic email messages. I haven't seen all the data, but there's evidence that certain Republican keywords or conservative keywords get blocked, whereas Democratic emails get through. I don't know about that. It came up over in the House. It's in House Bill 20. We have a separate bill over in the Senate. We're going to have a hearing in the next day or so to kind of vet the issue. So we know the answer to that. If we can come up with language that works, that has the intended effect, you bet. What we don't want to do is to allow that to mess with the social media bill, which is pretty well vetted, and we not that everyone loves it, but you know what the opposition is, you know what the arguments are. So the email issue is interesting, it's important, and if we can get it developed and vetted, it'll be in the same bill. Otherwise, they'll be in separate bills.
Great. So I know there are a couple questions left. I think I was trying to read these on the fly, and I think we covered most of the content that were in those questions somewhere in the conversation. But I urge people to reach out to any of the folks that were here. I'm going to come to you guys in 1 second for a 1 minute wrap up each. The other thing I want to urge everyone to know and understand, these three legislators and Tom included in this group, but these three legislators are literally three of the best legislators I know in this country, who, whether you agree or disagree with them on this issue or any other issue, their heart and their heads are in the right place. And they consistently fight for what they see as right for their constituents. And so I appreciate, I'll have to email the same thing to Danny, but I want to tell both of you that are still here, I appreciate you very much, not just for doing this, but for what you do for the country. So with that, let me go to you first, Justin, if you don't mind, to give me, a 60-second wrap up of whatever you want to say.
It won't take 60 seconds, but I know Texas is motivated. I know, a lot of where we're seeing all these bills pass are very populist movements like Florida, like Texas. And I think it's going to be adjudicated in the courts. And ultimately, I think we're going to see the same result as in Florida. I think we're going to see it in Texas as well. And if we don't, then we're going to see it in the Supreme Court. And we're definitely going to see some interesting news come out of it. That's for sure.
Thank you very much, Representative Hill. Senator Hughes.
I like everybody on this call. I did before. I still do. I've you guys, and we're friends, and we've done a lot of things together. And these are tough issues. And I know we all hold these principles. We all believe generally the same ones. We don't always apply them in the same way. We want to get to the right result. I know we all do. And so, Representative Hill, you said it. This is going to end up in the courts, and who knows how it's all going to get hashed out. But I know that everybody here takes a thoughtful approach, and I don't claim to be the only one. I'm in addition to being the dumbest one on this call, but I do represent some pretty smart people. And so we're gonna try to we're gonna try one solution in Texas. Florida tried one, Missouri tried one. The laboratories of democracy are going to work. Federalism is going to work. We're going to get to the right place. I will say, for my part, weighing all these factors, we're going to do what it takes to get Texans back online and protect their free speech. I know we all are for that. That's job one for me. And I'm so glad to be participating today. I thank each one of you.
Thank you, Senator. Tom, you want to bring us home and say goodnight?
Sure, absolutely. No, I have the utmost respect for Senator Hughes. I've testified several times in favor of bills that he was promoting. I don't impugn the motives of any of the conservatives who are trying to move these kinds of approaches. I think their complaints are largely valid. But, for those of us who believe in markets and who believe in the Constitution, we're not about results, actually. We're about process. It's our belief that as long as the proper processes are followed, then the results take care of themselves. We don't like it when government gets involved and starts trying to reach a particular result. We want decisions made from the bottom up by the decisions of American consumers, not from the top down by government. So we're process people. We're not results oriented people. I think anytime in politics, when you start off with a desired result, and then you say, and I'll just use whatever means I possibly can to accomplish that result, that's more of a big government approach, not a limited government approach. So I would urge conservatives to understand that just because things are not exactly the way we want them to be, and just because we're not getting the results right now that we want from a particular market, it doesn't mean that giving the government enormous additional new powers will make things better. In fact, our philosophical approach is to be distrustful of government when it comes along and says, I'm going to solve your problem for you. Most of the time when government tries to solve one problem, it creates 10 unintended consequences. And I'm afraid that is the situation that we're in right now in these attempts to regulate social media.
Well, thank you all so much. I want to thank the participants. We dropped a few, but boy, we held a whole bunch of people for being an hour and 15 minutes. Thank you for joining IPI. If you have any questions, feel free to, I don't know, just email Tom at tom@ipi.org, and he can get them out to people. Stay tuned. We have at least a few more tech issues coming up this year on Zoom calls. And I know Tom has a slate of other Zoom calls coming up as well. So our Zoom events. So stay tuned, and thank you for paying attention. And again, all you gentlemen, thank you for being on the panel. I appreciate you. Have a great day.
Thank you.